So, you've learned how to screen and select great staff and volunteers. Now let's get down to the second most important aspect of keeping kids safe, supervision. So often in ministry, our best intentions get thwarted by circumstances beyond our control. And if you're like most churches already running lean on staff, let's face it, finding children's ministry volunteers can be a real challenge. But hang in there. In this next segment, we'll take a look at the kinds of scenarios you'll likely be faced with. When I ask, what's wrong with this picture, you'll have about 30 seconds to brainstorm a solution. And that's about the same amount of time you'll have in real life to solve the situation. I guarantee you'll come up with solutions for handling even the toughest supervision challenges in ways that keep your kids safe and protect your church legally. So are you ready? Okay, let's take a look at our first situation in the toddler's room. It's Sunday morning, you're in the toddler's room, and there are 2 adults and 6 toddlers. Well, everything's going fine until one of the toddlers starts acting up. Why? Well, maybe he didn't have breakfast this morning. Maybe he has a tooth coming in. For some reason, he's a toddler. He's having a bad morning. So one of the adults says, I'm going to take him out of the room because we don't want to drag down the other 5 toddlers. Probably a great decision. However, this adult takes the toddler out of the room to go read with him in another area. What's wrong with this picture? As you may have guessed, both supervisors are in the violation of the 2-adult rule. No one is available to monitor either leader's actions. This might not seem like a big deal, but statistically, most incidences of sexual abuse will occur when someone is being transferred alone from one location to another, and the proper safeguards are no longer in place. Here's one way these workers could have handled their situation. While they were both in the same room together, they could have called for backup, because let's face it, they needed backup. When another adult arrives, the adult with a fussy child could then leave the classroom and go into the hallway to read a book where there are other people present. With this solution, both workers have maintained the 2-adult rule while addressing the needs of the one toddler who needed to leave the classroom for a while. Now here's another tip. When working with toddlers, they will often want to sit with you as you play or read them a book. Having the child sit beside you on one knee is a much better practice than having a child directly on your lap. In other words, always try to avoid placing a child in a way that covers your own private area. Are you ready for the next scenario? Good. Let's move on to the preschoolers. Many churches rely on youth volunteers to help fill the gaps in their staffing for children's programs. This is a great way to mentor young people into leadership positions for the future. But there's an inherent risk to putting youth workers in charge of small children. That's because nearly half of all reported sex abuse cases include a minor molesting a younger child. Whenever there's a disparity in power, whether it's because of age, size, or position, the level of risk increases. And whenever the level of risk increases, you need to upgrade your supervision level as well. Look at the scenario in this preschool classroom. 2 adults and 1 youth worker in a room filled with 10 kids between 3 and 5 years old. This preschooler needs to go to the bathroom. We all know that means it's a very urgent situation. So, the youth worker escorts the child out of the room, down the hall, and quickly into the bathroom. What's wrong with this picture? Knowing the increased risk of pairing an older child with a younger one, youth workers should never be allowed to handle children in isolation. Personal activities such as using the bathroom or changing diapers are prime opportunities for sexual misconduct to occur. So whether you're a youth worker or an adult, the two-person rule always applies, especially in the case of bringing children to the bathroom. So in this situation, it would have been better to call in another adult and then leave the student helper assisting in the classroom. Then the two adults could escort the child down to the bathroom. Now here's a hint. Before letting that child enter the bathroom, check to make sure no other adults are in there already. Additionally, the adults should wait outside of the bathroom door to make sure that no one attempts to enter while the child is inside. It's important to make sure you have solid bathroom policies that everyone follows. Now, let's move on to middle school. Preteen and teenage kids are the most vulnerable to sexual abuse, and they frequently volunteer in a variety of areas around the church, oftentimes in isolated areas. In this scenario, a 12-year-old boy has been invited to assist the worship production team by serving in a dark sound room with a production technician. He probably enjoys messing around with all the great equipment in there. That's what makes it a popular area for kids to volunteer. But what's wrong with this picture? Right away, I'm sure you noticed that these two people are alone in a dimly lit, soundproof room. High risk. Church staff need to identify areas of high risk throughout their facility. For instance, a sound room is a high-risk area. Youth should never be allowed to enter when only one adult is present. And the production booth is only one area around the church to consider. Often, young volunteers will do custodial work around the church. This again may put youth in an isolated, unattended area where the risk level increases. So building child protection programs doesn't just apply to your classroom and children's ministry. It needs to be a church-wide effort to safeguard all children throughout every area of the church. And finally, let's visit the high school ministry. This last scene is a common scenario, especially for youth pastors. Their success relies on building relationships with students, and often, youth pastors will set aside one-on-one time to develop these relationships. Great idea, but it can put both the student and the pastor in an extremely vulnerable situation. For instance, after Sunday night youth group, two kids need a ride home. The youth pastor decides to drive them both home. He drops off the first student and is left driving the second student alone. What's wrong with this picture? What are some other ways this youth pastor could have dealt with the problem of two kids needing a ride home? Well, first, the youth pastor should have called both kids' parents to get permission to drive their kids home. But he also should have made arrangements to avoid being alone with a second student, maybe asking another adult at church to accompany him in the car. It's an extra step for sure, but avoiding any appearance of impropriety, let alone the temptation to do anything inappropriate while alone with a student, is well worth the extra effort it takes to safeguard the kids in our care. Ideally, plan ahead so that you are never in a situation that breaks the two-adult rule. You've done a great job today. Thanks for thinking through this so carefully. Creating supervision policies and implementing them takes time and effort. But without these safeguards in place, you and your church run the risk of being liable for allegations of sexual abuse.